Today we're going to talk about an unloved variant in the Chrysler Corporation lineup from the late 1970s and early 1980s, and that is the Chrysler R-Bodies. This platform was one of the shortest-lived Chrysler platforms of all time, being introduced in the 1979 model year and sunset after the 1981 model year. And we're going to take a look here at this particular New Yorker Fifth Avenue. That's a pretty sweet variant of the R platform. What's interesting about this is that the R platform really had some, well, let's just say rational beginnings. In 1977, General Motors had introduced its downsized full-size lineup, including the Caprice, as well as the Catalina and Bonneville, the LeSabre and Electra, the 88, 98, the Cadillac DeVille and Fleetwood. And on the Chevrolet side, I forgot to mention the Impala as well. Ford would also introduce its Panther platform cars for the 1979 model year. And interestingly, the GM full-size vehicles, that platform would last almost 20 years. The Ford Panther platform cars that were introduced in 1979, that platform would last almost 32 years. But poor Chrysler, with its R-Body platform, it would just last for the 1979, 1980, and 1981 model year. Now, to say that this would be a tumultuous time for Chrysler would be an understatement, as Lee Iacocca was hired in July of 1978, around the time that the R-Body platform vehicles were introduced. And perhaps it was this R platform that really hastened Chrysler's near demise, although I think that could more be attributed to just their general quality issues, as well as the fact that Chrysler division, for instance, didn't even have a car other than a full-size car before the Cordoba was introduced. Nonetheless, let's take a look at this New Yorker and talk more about the R-Body. Now, this is a special two-tone New Yorker and also has some other interesting content and options, including the cloth interior, which we're going to see in a second. And it's also a special handling car. Now, these cars handled relatively well from the get-go, owing to their torsion bar front suspension, leaf spring rear setup, and the R-Body platform kind of got that suspension from the Chrysler B-Bodies that were introduced in 1962. This was kind of a warmed-over B-Body platform that Chrysler put, obviously, a lot of new sheet metal on top of. And I think overall the sheet metal looks kind of dated. Imagine this car came out in 1979. The styling certainly does not look forward-thinking. If anything, it looks kind of backward-thinking, a very distinct three-box design with very angular styling. Take a look at that fender and quarter panel profile, the absolutely or near flat belt line to the vehicle. It does have a nice feature line that runs the length of the car, starting all the way at the tip of the fender and extending back to the rear quarter panel. It appears that it also kind of dives downward slightly as it approaches the rear. And the light breaks nicely over that surface. I think the two-tone paint is actually doing the car some favors in this particular circumstance, although the two-tone paint with the vinyl top or half vinyl toupe, it's interesting, let's just say. And if we take a bird's eye view of this car, we'll get even greater look at this crazy two-tone paint scheme. It's one thing to have two-tone, you obviously have the hood and the deck lid and the upper portion of the quarter there painted a different color than the lower. But take a look at the roof. You've got the darker brown half toupe vinyl roof in the back. You've also got the A pillars and the B pillars and the top of the roof panel painted the dark brown paint. Then the absolute top of the roof is painted a lighter color. So they really took this two-tone paint to the extreme. You could imagine that they could have just painted the whole top of the roof that dark brown, and I don't think anybody would have known the difference. Certainly wouldn't have known if you were just looking at the car when you were driving on the road, because nobody can really see the roof panel. But they took the extra step of, I guess, making that a different color. Interesting and somewhat expensive, let's say. Now, if you look at this car in greater detail, as I mentioned, it really looks like it was a dated design, despite the fact it was all new for 1979. And it looks very Ford-esque. It has a number of Ford cues. One could say that that deck lid kind of looks like a Mercury Cougar deck lid of the era, or something that's related to Ford. You also have the flat belt line, very characteristic of Ford's during the Jean Bourdonnais era of styling in cars like the Lincoln Mark VI. And perhaps that's because Chrysler had a number of designers that came over from Ford, including a gentleman who would become the Chrysler chief designer, Don De La Rosa, had worked at Ford for many years and even headed up the Ghia division back in the day. And I have to imagine that some of what you see here is a result of Chrysler designers coming from Ford. In fact, even Elwood Engel came over from Ford after he was passed over in 1961 for the top job at Ford's design studios. There's also a lot of kitsch in this car, I have to say, between that vinyl roof. I guess I was calling it a half vinyl roof. It's really a quarter vinyl roof. And then you even have vinyl padding on the deck lid there. I don't know what is going on. That is just atrocious and tacky and over the top. God, you got to love the late 1970s. And I have to say, to some degree, I would guess the designers were trying to make this car look big despite its smallish size, at least smallish relative to earlier Chryslers. That very vertical C-pillar makes the deck lid longer and gives you this sense that the car is quite lengthy, and it is. This 118.5-inch wheelbase on the R-body Chryslers was very long, especially when you compared it to other contemporary vehicles of the day. And the styling just tried to make it look even longer as opposed to having it look kind of neat and tidy. Now, as I mentioned, this was a top-of-the-line car. That meant that it was a Fifth Avenue edition New Yorker. Notice the Fifth Avenue script here in the rear quarter glass, and the vinyl top print pattern, I don't know what you would call that, but it is different. It looks like elephant skin almost. I don't know if that's a compliment or not. But the Fifth Avenue moniker would later go on to other Chrysler vehicles, like the M-Body in particular, where it would become extremely successful. But here at this point, it was just a trim on the Chrysler New Yorker. Now let's rotate inside for a second, because this is where things get even crazier on this two-tone New Yorker. Notice the two-tone interior to match the exterior, the kind of chocolate brown as well as lighter, I guess we could call it, not quite tan, but I don't know, a lighter brown color. And it's almost like it's this corduroy look to the cloth fabric. It does look rich. It does look interesting. Take a look at those door panels there with the casket handled door pull. That does look rich. You still have the lavalier strap on the B pillar, kind of harken back to some Imperial content of the day. But by this time, the Imperial was gone, at least until the 1981 model year, when it would be reintroduced as a coupe only. And you could get an even better view of the interior here by taking a look at this photo. Look at that center section. It does have an armrest, but that is all that darker chocolate brown. And then you have, like I said, the kind of corduroy fabric interior. I actually like the fabric and cloth interior on this car. I wish that they still had fabric interiors on upper-end luxury cars. I am kind of getting tired of leather. I don't know about anybody else, but it seems like every car today has leather seats. I think a nice cloth seat is better. It's not too hot in the summer, not too cool in the winter, and you don't stick to it either. So it's overall just pretty comfortable. And up front in this particular 1981 New Yorker Fifth Avenue, you can see you have the split bench seat. The two-tone seating continues with that wonderful chocolate brown armrest, similar door pulls. The dash on these is okay. It's not overly ornate, nor is it cheap looking. I think Chrysler actually did a pretty decent job with the interior on these vehicles, although I'm not a fan of that particular two-spoke wheel. It just looks kind of droopy overall. I like the earlier two-spoke wheels that Chrysler employed, and we'll show you one now on this earlier New Yorker R-body. Notice the fake wood and the dash that slants significantly toward the driver and passenger. My guess is that this was done to kind of pull the instruments and the radio and things forward so that it was better for the reach envelope overall. You could reach it more easily, but yet you had plenty of interior space. By kind of slanting that dashboard inward toward the bottom, it made it feel more spacious on the inside, had more room to move your legs about. And imagine if that dashboard were rotated just straight vertically, it would appear imposing and make the interior feel claustrophobic. I do like the detailing on the light on the door panel here, and they have the little red light so that let's say you have the door open, oncoming cars can see you a little bit better. But I think overall the interior in these isn't too bad. Now, unfortunately, by this point, horsepower was going away in all vehicles, and the R-body Chryslers were no different. The standard in some R-bodies, not the New Yorker Fifth Avenues like you see here, was a slant 6 engine that made just a little over 100 horsepower. Most of these vehicles were equipped with a 318 two-barrel V8 Or the 360 was the top option that you could have in 2 or 4 barrel form. And most of these engines, even the 360, for instance, with a 2-barrel carburetor, was making 145 horsepower, I believe. It just was not a very stout engine. And these were relatively big cars. You could get a little more oomph if you ordered the 4-barrel 360, but that was a very, very rare option and generally just reserved for police cars and police vehicles, I would say. But the 318 and the 360 and the Slant 6 all were very reliable engines during this particular time frame. And that was one of the great things about these Chryslers is they did have reliable, really well-made engines and torque flight transmissions, although some of the electronics that were outfitted to the engine, in particular the ignition system, the spark control computers and things like that, were a bit fragile. So it's unfortunate because customers did experience issues despite the fact that the overall engines were quite reliable and stout. And I think Chrysler made excellent V8s. In fact, I'm having a hard time thinking of a bad Chrysler V8 of the era. It's really hard to think of one. I actually can't even do it. Notice here, by the way, in the engine compartment, the white plastic thing around the battery, the so-called thermoguard. And that was there to protect your battery from the winter. I don't know if it worked or not. Chrysler would eliminate it later, but they had it for a number of years. I think it probably did work. And here we'll take a look at the body tags on Chryslers. This is something that you can find on any of your classic Chrysler makes, and it contains all of the options on it. Notice this car has a special tag that says special handling car. So somebody wanted their car to handle even better than the standard vehicle. And like I said, this torsion bar setup, this car had the longitudinal torsion bar setup. The M bodies, for instance, had transverse torsion bars with the leaf spring rear. These are not, I would say, overly plush riders. They're pretty stiff to begin with. So the special handling car was even stiffer. I have just a standard M body 1983 Plymouth Grand Fury. It doesn't have the handling package or anything. And that's a pretty stiff ride, but it does handle quite well. And that was one of the hallmarks of these Chryslers, was that they were really interested in handling over ride, whereas Fords were interested in ride over handling. So just depending on what you wanted, GM was somewhere in between. And there you have it, a bit of the tale of the Chrysler R-Body. Now, remember that this is only a few model years away from the Ford Aerobird, the 1983 Thunderbird, the Tempo Topaz, the 86 Taurus and Sable. And so Ford was really going in a completely different direction than Chrysler when it came to styling during this time frame. And I will say Chrysler did kind of espouse the GM as well as Ford style. Obviously, the Panther platform vehicles like the LTD as well as the Marquis, the Grand Marquis of the era, were very boxy. And so were the GM cars that were introduced in 1977. But Ford really was the one that would break through in the 1980s with aerodynamic styling, and pretty interesting because they actually didn't have a wind tunnel, whereas General Motors did. But GM decided to go with the so-called three-box design, similar to what you see on this R-Body. So what do you think? What do you think of this R-Body Chrysler? Is it tacky? Is it over the top? Is it good looking? What is it? Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.